Thanks, Catherine. As the party's spokesperson on Children and Youth Affairs, initially I'm going to focus on that area of the budget and then raise a few other points. So, while some of the parts of the Children and Youth Affairs budget are welcome, unfortunately it was lacking in lots of other areas, particularly around detail, I will say, and around the early years in the childcare sector. We need a radical new approach for our early years childcare sector. The current system is broken and completely unsustainable for staff. It's also financially crippling for thousands of parents. Families are being squeezed every which way through unaffordable rents and mortgages. We have a high cost of living and childcare costs that amount to second mortgages in some instances, or second rent. In our alternative budget, which was published on the 1st of October, one of the points that we made in that was we would commence a 5-year programme of reform that ensures that the early years and childcare staff are properly paid, which is absolutely crucial to this sector. And also, we need to see a slashing of fees for parents, which was part of our proposal. It would cost 28 million in the first year, and the full year cost is 85 million. Our proposals would reduce fees across the state for parents significantly over a 5-year period, starting with a reduction of 13%, and this would increase to a 66% reduction by the end of year 5. It amounts roughly to an average cost initially, with the 13% reduction, of 100 per month on a monthly creche fee of 800. We would also introduce a proper pay scale for all workers in the sector, starting with the current living wage of €12.30, and this would increase year upon year over a 5-year period for all staff across the whole childcare and early years sector. We've long advocated, and it's a particular issue that I feel passionate about, and in 2017 I was involved in a report here on committee level, and also a motion that we brought forward about the wages and the terms and conditions in this sector. And what's extremely frustrating is that TDs and senators from all parties, independents, everybody, was over recently getting their picture taken in relation to a launch that SIPTU did about the terms and conditions for workers and their wages, and yet we have a budget that completely failed to deliver on that. Workers need to be financially supported and encouraged to upskill and remain in the sector, because at the moment we're seeing burnout and people are not staying in the sector, which is causing huge issues because it's going to be a staffing crisis. But as with everything in this country, it has to get to a crisis before anyone actually pays attention. As it currently stands, the market model that we have here for the childcare sector and early years sector risks being reduced to business designed solely for profit. And we've all seen the revelations over the summer in the hide-and-seek creche that the RTE Investigates programme did, and we all know how horrifying that was and how horrible that was to watch. But the reality is, if you do not address the issues of fees for parents and the issues of terms and conditions and proper decent wages for workers, that's basically going to continue, and there's no point in saying anything different. I just want to also touch on the allocation for TUSLA. We haven't been given any amount of social workers, how many aftercare workers, how many admin workers are going to be put into place to relieve the admin burden on social workers. There's no numbers whatsoever. There was a HICRA report published just last week, specifically in relation to the Carlow, Kilkenny, South Tipperary area, that showed a huge percentage of children who had no social workers. HICRA did an investigation, and a lot of kids were only appointed a social worker, a month or two prior to this investigation. So there's major issues just in that one part of the country, and yet the budget doesn't say how many new social workers are going to be appointed, which makes me think that the money that they're talking about is just going to plug the current gaps in the system, and it's not actual new money. I'd also like to mention the issue around housing. It's one of the biggest issues that I would say nearly every TD deals with in their constituency, but we've become totally desensitised to the homeless situation. It's just become normal, because that's the only sort of solution, or that's the only conclusion I can come to in relation to homelessness, because we talk about it so often in here, and yet absolutely nothing constructive is being done. Our own homeless shelter, the Good Shepherd in Kilkenny, even announced yesterday that there's no new money in this budget for them, and yet they're doing fantastic work along with other places, not just in my constituency but throughout the country, and no additional help being given to them. The school completion programme, which some people will be aware of, also falls into the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, where it specifically focuses on the need of the child. It's in certain schools, not every school has it. It provides counselling, play therapy, homework clubs and lots of services for children who are seen to be potentially at risk of dropping out of school. No new money for them. They've had their money cut since 2008. They're on a shoestring budget, operating a great service, yet in a few years' time when they close down because of the lack of money, everyone will be in here throwing their hands up saying, gosh, how do we let that happen? We let it happen because we're not putting the money into it, into the services. That's what happens. And it's, as my colleague said, it's about political choice and whether or not you want to help people and help people who are currently struggling, or whether you want to just keep rewarding the people at the top. And I think we've seen enough years of this government to know exactly where their priorities lie. I think that is most of the points that I wanted to make. The last point I want to make is in relation to the carbon tax. As a rural constituency, I mean, there's obviously urban areas, but we have lots of rural areas with no public transport. I myself drive here every day because that's the only choice I have. The last train that goes home to my hometown is at 6:25, and as we all know, it often goes a lot longer than that. And here, people don't have the choice to use public transport, and you cannot penalise them with a carbon tax if they don't have that choice. Fine if you have a choice of public transport, but we don't have that choice in so many areas, and it's just cruel. And the amount of people already panicking in relation to the carbon tax and how are they going to pay for coal and how are they going to pay for their oil. They don't have the option of changing to newer heating systems. They don't have the money. They currently barely make ends meet. There are so many families that every week have to choose between, am I going to pay the heating bill, am I going to pay the electricity bill? And that is the reality. And if you don't think that's the reality, then go out to some of the constituencies and talk to people, because the reaction since Tuesday, since the announcement of the carbon tax, is just that. People saying, I'm cutting back on this now, I'm cutting back on something else just so I can afford the heating because we're coming into winter. But that's just totally, totally unacceptable that we're allowing that to happen in this day and age, and that we're being told, you know, everyone needs to upgrade to electric cars. I mean, that's great if you can. Are you going to subsidise all these cars for people? That's not the reality for most people. They can't afford to make those changes. And you can't penalise somebody who doesn't have the option. And that's exactly what this tax is doing. And it's just a fast revenue-raising measure. It's not anything to do with the environment and climate change. And that's the last point I'll make. Thanks, Chair.